myself in the past, so there's that out of the way. And next thing, what I am is the figurehead of Whatcom Writers and Publishers. And the actual person who does most of the work is here, and that's Jennifer Mueller. Say hello, Jennifer.
Hello.
Yeah, you have to say it to show up if they're in speaker view. So say it.
Hello.
Okay, how many books have you put out this year, Jennifer?
None. I've been stuck on this one book.
How many did you put out last year?
One, I think. Or was it three? They all kind of run together.
It all kinds of runs together when you have 80 books. So yeah, one of those people. Since this is a virtual version of the thing we do typically at Nikki's Bella Marina, which I hope that when we come back for the new cycle in September, that we will actually be there. That would be so beautiful. But I want to offer anybody who has new news about publications or upcoming things, readings or stuff that you are going to be doing, just shout it out and you'll become the big face on the screen, I hope. I guess that's the easiest. Actually, I can see you all. So raise your hand if you want to say something and I will. Janet does. Janet Oakley.
Okay, so I today uploaded both my audiobook and the new interior to the Using Affair. But I'm really excited to be the December International Book Club of the month for the Pulpwood Queens, and it's the Quisling Factor, which is the sequel to the Using Affair. So I'm very excited about that.
That's excellent. Congratulations, Janet. Barbara Clark. Put your doodad down. Oh, you're muted too. You're still muted.
Okay.
There you go.
So yes, thank you, Sean. I have a memoir being published in April 6th, and I have an event at Village Bookstores on April 9th, Friday night, 6 o'clock. It's a memoir, and it's very exciting.
Be sure to mention that next month too, please.
Okay, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, I started mentioning when my book launch was going to be somewhere around in March of 2019. And by the time we got to September, and I would say October 4th, 7 p.m. And they all showed up. So that's how you do it.
Okay, I'll do that. Thanks for the advice.
Yeah. Any other people need to make an announcement? Oh, and I can tell you that I have read a chunk of Barbara's book. And so I'm excited to own it. And it's very smooth and very cool, fascinating stuff. So yes. And well, Susan, you're muted.
This month, Whatcom Reads is publishing their anthology called Reconciliation, I believe is the theme anyway. And my essay will be in there, and probably a few other people in this group will be presenting. And I think the first day will be on the 21st, and the next one is the 23rd and the 28th, something like that. There's going to be on at Village Books.
Cool. All right. So anybody who's in Whatcom, the Whatcom Reads anthology, anybody else here? Raise your hand. No? Okay. The next thing. Oh, yeah. Oh, right. The ebook of my memoir, A Quest for Tears, Surviving Traumatic Brain Injury, dropped on February 1. So no matter where you are in the world, you can now get an ebook of it without having to pay exorbitant shipping fees. Tell all your friends in the UK, Japan, India, and I think South Africa would be another good place to sell it. Just tell them that they should buy my ebook. Okay. Now there are a couple of chat mentions here. Okay, February 21st and 28th, Claire has a, okay, she made a note. I don't know, it's February 21 and 28. Oh, the readings. Okay, the reconciliation readings for Whatcom Rights. Perfect. Thank you, Claire. All right. Well, if that takes care of announcements for the time being, I am going to turn it over to Jennifer Mueller, who is going to introduce our speaker.
Oh dear.
Oh, did it? Oh, I figured you would.
Well, does he need introduction?
He needs no introduction. I'll grant you that, but he should get one anyway. Do you need to? Do you have the blurb in front of you?
No, because it's in speaker view.
Well, you can still pull up your website. I mean, the Village Books. Do you want me to read it?
If it's there,
Yeah,
I'd have to get to it.
I have it. Okay, I will do this. So I would like to welcome Jonathan Haupt. He is the executive director of the nonprofit Pat Conroy Literary Center and the former director of the University of South Carolina Press, where he created the Story River Books fiction imprint with Conroy, named by Garden and Gun magazine as one of the top 10 things to love about the South, and there are many. Jonathan's book reviews and author interviews have appeared in the Charleston Post and Courier, Beaufort Low Country Weekly, Beaufort Lifestyle Magazine, Savannah Morning News, Beacon Magazine, Southern Review of Books, and Southern Writers Magazine Sweet Tea blog. He's the co-editor with Nicole Seitz of the anthology Our Prince of Scribes, Writers Remember Pat Conroy, which you can get if you go to Village Books, you can order it. Now the winner of 17 book awards. Jonathan also serves on the boards of the South Carolina Academy of Authors and the Friends of South Carolina Libraries and the Affiliates Committee of the American Writers Museum. In 2020, he was recognized with the Doug Marlette Literacy Leadership Award presented by the Pulpwood Queens, the largest book club in the United States. So with no further ado and with all kinds of accolades under his belt, I welcome Jonathan Haupt, who is in North Carolina and talking. No? South?
The other one. The other one. Yes.
Yeah.
The South one. I knew that. What am I don't know what's wrong with me. South Carolina. And that's still 3 hours east of here. So thank him for staying up later than I would. Sir.
Thank you, Sean, and many thanks to you, Jennifer, for the invitation to do this tonight. And thank you all for being here, really, for clocking in. I'm sure you've got some questions, and we'll try and do this in such a way that we've got time for those questions at the end, because that's often why people sign up for workshops with this particular topic. But I'm going to do a screen share and tell you a couple stories and share some resources with you, both on screen share, and you're welcome to take screenshots of anything I put up. I'm also going to drop a couple of handouts of documents into the chat. You'll be able to save those as well as resources on this particular topic, pathways to publication. But before I do that, before I lose sight of all of you, when I put the screen share up, I'm really curious to know how many of you are published in some way or another, either books, articles, stories, something with your byline out there in the world for folks to read. Looks like quite a few of you in this group. That's fantastic. All right, excellent. So that means you're probably going to know a lot of stuff in addition to what I'm able to share, and that'll make for an interesting Q&A. So with that said, let me switch to our screen share here. And oh, that guy, I know him. All right, can you all see that? Okay, yes, thank you, Sean. I can see you, Sean. So your nodding of the head is my guide that things are going okay right now. All right, so that's me in the Conroy Center. Let me tell you a little bit about, there we are, my own story, my own pathway into being a publisher, which I was for about 20 years, off and on, in a number of different capacities. I started out in publishing at the Southern Illinois University Press. If you're not familiar at all with the concept of the university press, it's a small, typically small independent publisher, always attached to a university, thus the name. There are about 150 in the country. And I started out at Southern Illinois, where I was for about 6 years in the marketing department as a publicist. And primarily what I was doing was writing promotional copy or jacket copy or flap copy, as it's sometimes called, the descriptions of books that appear on books, and booking author events and working with booksellers, wonderful people and librarians and all sorts of fun stuff, sort of be a matchmaker to connect books to the readers who would ultimately benefit from their existence. And after about 6 years of doing that, I'd done everything there was to do in Carbondale, Illinois, multiple times to the point of absolute boredom. So I was looking for other places to go. And one of those places that was also looking for someone like me to show up was Columbia, South Carolina, home to the University of South Carolina Press. So I came there 2004 and was in that publisher staff for 16 years, originally as a marketing person and then working my way up, ultimately becoming the publisher, the director, at which point I was doing editorial work as well. And at about that time, I had an opportunity to create Story River Books, an original fiction imprint specializing in novels and short story collections of the American South. That's the project that Pat Conroy and I came to do together as partners, as student and mentor, and those roles often reversed between the two of us, as should be the case in any good teacher-student relationship. And Pat, who at that point was by far the best known, most beloved writer in the American South, knew quite a lot about the much larger world of publishing, major New York houses, and the work that they and they alone could do. And he was a magnificent mentor to me in teaching me what that world looked like. And collectively, we found ways to take our tiny little Story River Books imprint and try and do at least some of the things that the major houses out of New York were doing to the benefit of our small but loyal core of writers. There were 22 books published in Story River in that imprint over the span of about 5 years, the last 5 years of Pat Conroy's life. This is what he chose to do with his time. And several of those books went on to become winners of national awards, and several of those writers have since gone on to be published by much, much larger publishers. It was a launching pad for some of those authors, as Pat and I certainly envisioned it would be, and I'll tell you a little more about one of those along the way. When Mr. Conroy died, March 4th of 2016, about 5 years ago, I left my safe and familiar and fairly lucrative, frankly, job in publishing to instead go to Beaufort, South Carolina and become the director of our Conroy Center, which at that point was a startup nonprofit that did not have a year's worth of budget in the bank. It was a tremendous risk for all of us to do this. 5 years in now, we just bought our first piece of property, a permanent home for the center. We get grants and donations from all over the world, and we're able to help writers in an ever-growing number of ways. We are not a publisher, to make that clear, but we are very much an educator of writers doing programs like what I get to do tonight. And the way I sort of distinguish between those two parts of my professional life, my life in publishing versus my life in the nonprofit literary center world, is that publishing for me was mostly about saying no all the time. No, I'm sorry, we can't publish your book. No, Oprah is not going to want to talk to you about your book. No, the New York Times is not going to review your book. It's just no, 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 over and over again. And in part, that's really sort of managing the expectations that writers may bring to a publisher that are above and beyond what that writer and that publisher can collectively do. Whereas what I do at the Conroy Center, at the Literary Center, is all about saying yes. It's all about helping writers in every single way that I can. I am associated with 2 books in terms of having a byline, having a published piece in them. I'll tell you very quickly about those, not as a commercial for either one of them, but just to sort of explain how they came to be published as examples of some pathways to publication. And let's see. There we are. So this is what Sean mentioned in my bio, is Our Prince of Scribes, which was published in the fall of 2018 by the University of Georgia Press, another university press, and is now, in fact, the winner of an embarrassingly large number of book awards, 17 so far. This was a project I was working on as I was transitioning, as I was leaving the University of South Carolina Press, where I was the publisher, and going to the Conroy Center to be its first and thus far only director. And it's an anthology, which means it's a collection of pieces by many writers, 67 altogether, including me. And even though I was a publisher and had been for a number of years and had all sorts of publishing connections, I decided that this book really needed representation, that it needed an agent. And I was very fortunate to get to work with one I had known as a publisher, one whose clients I had turned down any number of times. I was saying no to her all the time, but I was very impressed by the work she was doing on behalf of those clients. And I knew if I was ever in a spot where I wanted to work with an agent, she would be the top of the list. Her name is Mackenzie Fraser Bubb. She has been in publishing in one form or another since the age of 16. Her godmother created one of the great publishing boot camps, the Columbia University Press publishing, or excuse me, the Columbia University Publishing Program. So Mackenzie really just grew up in this world, and she was an ideal agent for this particular project, which has a number of New York Times bestselling writers in it. Jonathan Galassi, who's publisher of Farrar, Straus, Giroux, is in the book. These are not unknown people. They had very high expectations of what can and what could and should happen for the book. In the end, we published with the University of Georgia Press and got a much better deal than a first-time writer, or indeed any writer working with a university press should, by virtue of having an agent. An agent was absolutely essential to the deal we were able to get. And here I should point out that none of the 67 writers in this book make a dime off of it. We had no personal investment in profiting from this project. All the royalties go to the Conroy Center, to our nonprofit. And our interest in getting as lucrative a deal out of this was because we knew those funds would be used to help other writers. And Mackenzie understood that as well. The Georgia Writers Hall of Fame, another nonprofit, wrote the check that paid for the first printing of this book, something they had never done for any book before. That was also a really wonderful gift to make that first print run possible. The book's been out for a little over 2 years. It sold somewhere around 7,000 copies between multiple printings and hardcover, paperback edition, and ebook. Very respectable numbers by university press standards, and indeed by any small press standards. And an incredible experience for all of us who've been a part of that book. So here's the other book that I am associated with, and so is Jennifer and Janet, who are both on this call with us as well. This is the Pulpwood Queens anthology, which came out, a couple of years ago now, on the 20th anniversary of the Pulpwood Queens Book Club, the largest book club in the US. And this too had a number of New York Times writers contribute to it, and several other writers, about 67, actually about the same number as Our Prince of Scribes. This was not put out by a university press or a major publisher. This was put out by Brother Mockingbird, a relatively small publishing company. And this was done as a print-on-demand book, as so many small publishers will utilize for lots of good reasons, for cost control, for inventory control. And certainly no shame in that. It's certainly not the strike against a book that print on demand was 10 years ago. Now it's very common, and indeed you will see major books by major writers that are kept in print by virtue of being print on demand books. This book has, I think it's safe to say, not sold 7,000 copies, or potentially not even 1,000 copies. This was a labor of love for a good cause, and we were all happy to contribute our words and our time to it. But this is a much smaller book, a much more targeted audience, indeed, in mind for this particular one. So I've seen how both of those things can play out, having an agent, having a university press, a well-respected, well-established small press, and then working with someone who's basically a mom and pop operation with a very, very small press and very limited resources in terms of how to put that book into print. So those are how the two books that have my byline on them came to exist. I want to tell you about how the 2 books by this guy came to exist, because this is very instructive, I find, as well. So this is Pat Conroy, obviously a New York Times bestselling author of ultimately 12 books. And at the time I knew him, he looked very much like the guy in the photo there. This was old man Pat Conroy, who was my friend and my mentor. I want to tell you about young Pat Conroy, guy in his mid to late 20s, when he didn't know anything about anything. And these are his first 2 books, The Boo and The Water is Wide. And you're maybe familiar with the second one because it's been made into a film twice, and continues to be a very popular book, particularly among teachers to this day. It's possible you've never heard of the first one, and there's good reason for that as well. The Boo, the title of that book, is this guy right here, Colonel Corvese, who was Pat Conroy's mentor at the Citadel, the military college in Charleston, not far from where I am in Beaufort. Pat graduated from the Citadel in 1967, having a particularly rough experience, which he would later write about in the novel Lords of Discipline, which was also made into a film. But long before that book came out, he wrote a much earlier one in defense of this guy, the Boo, his mentor, after the Boo was demoted after Pat's graduation from being the commandant of cadets, very high and well-respected position, to being in charge of cadet baggage, which was the lowest position the president of the Citadel, the general, could give him without actually firing him. It was meant to be a colossal insult, and it was taken that way. And the Boo was very much beloved by Pat Conroy and so many other graduates of the Citadel that they wanted to do something for the colonel. And the Boo decided in conversation with Pat that perhaps they could write a collection of stories about the Boo and about other cadet experiences. And that's what Pat did. And it wasn't intended to be an angry book or a revenge book. It was really meant to be a love letter to the Boo and to the era of the Citadel in which the Boo had been commandant of cadets. So Pat, at 25 years old, pieces together this manuscript. Much of it is his own writing. Other pieces are borrowed from other cadets, their stories. And they come to a realization. Pat, I should mention at this time, is a teacher back here in Beaufort. High school, same school graduated from, for connections whatsoever to the publishing world. None of that has happened for Pat yet. So Pat remembers the story of how the book, The Boo, came to be published much later in life, and shares it in this book, My Exaggerated Life, which is an oral biography, meaning that Pat did not write a word that's in this book, but he said all of them in conversation with the writer Catherine Clark, who turned it into a running narrative, an oral biography. So I want to share with you a brief excerpt from this book, My Exaggerated Life, in which Pat remembers with some fondness and a little bit of humor what it was like to get that first book, The Boo, published. And here I should mention that Pat, at this point, is about 68 years old when he's telling this story. And he's remembering a time in 1969, maybe 1970, in conversation with the Boo, who at that point is a little bit sexist and a little bit homophobic, and you'll get a sense of that. Pat was neither of those things, but he was trying to capture the spirit of the Boo in this particular story. So let me make one change in my screen here, and then I can do that. There we are. So this is Pat telling our story. After I had finished writing the book, the Boo says, "Well, you guys were down there fixing your panties and putting on your bras in the English department. Did you ever talk about getting a book published?" I said, "Colonel, I have no idea how to get a book published." So the Colonel, of course, he says, and I've always loved this, "Well, let's look in the yellow pages." So we did. We looked in the yellow pages under printing, and we saw the R.L. Bryan Company that said business cards, invitations, books. I put on a coat and a tie, and the next day I go down there and I talk to the guy, vice president, you know, and I say, "I've got a book I'd like to be published." He said, "Great." And I said, "That can't be." He said, "We'd be happy to publish it. The Citadel is wonderful. We're a South Carolina company." I said, I heard it was hard to get a book published." He said, "Not for a smart guy like you." So I said, "How does it work?" He said, 2,000 books, $4,000. I said, "Is that how it works for everybody?" He said, "Well, what do you think? It's done for free?" So Pat Conroy, who will ultimately become an internationally acclaimed New York Times best-selling author many times over, self-published his first book, The Boo, He took out a bank loan. He had to borrow $3,000 of those $4,000 to pay for the publication of that first book. Made it all back very quickly because those copies had been pre-sold to Citadel alumni who were absolutely in love with the Boo in the same way Pat was. And Pat never really made a dime off that first printing. All of the money went to a gift fund to honor cadets who'd been killed in Vietnam, as the Boo had requested. Pat had many opportunities to sell the rights of this book to the larger publishers who would ultimately publish him over the course of his 50-year writing career, but he never did. He also never let this book go out of print. He often referred to it as the worst book ever written by an American. He did not think the writing was particularly good in this book, but he always wanted it to be available. He always wanted people to know that he, Pat Conroy, did not start out writing The Prince of Tides or any of his more acclaimed books, that he had a rough start. He had a book that didn't really seem like much of a book because he wrote it in a hurry and he didn't really know what he was doing at the time. But he always kept it in print. He always wanted people to be able to see what his start had been like. Well, after 2 years of teaching at Beaufort High, as the book, The Boo, comes out, the opportunity to go out to Defusky Isle in 1969, 1970, where he is not only the first white school teacher, but the first male school teacher on the island, gets out there and realizes that separate has not been equal, and through no particular fault of their own, these kids have been denied a quality of education equal to their white counterparts. And he dedicates himself fully to educating them, not just what's required by the school district, but teaching them how to live a life off the island. And he does that remarkably well at a time when that is not a particular popular idea with the school board and the school superintendent. So after a year of being a remarkable teacher to these 18 kids, Pat Conroy is fired and he sues for wrongful termination. And that becomes a national news story. At 27 years old, Pat is famous. There are reporters in Beaufort, South Carolina from the Washington Post, from the New York Times, covering the trial for wrongful termination of the liberal white school teacher. And these writers, these reporters who are coming down from elsewhere are telling Pat that this story needs to be told, regardless of the outcome of the trial, and that he, Pat Conroy, needs to write a book about this, which is something I think he had always intended to do, but he's highly motivated at this moment, particularly when he loses that trial and it becomes clear he's never going to work as a teacher again. One of those writers is a reporter named Richard Bruner, who gives Pat contact information for an agent, Julian Bach, in New York. And at that time, Julian Bach is probably one of the top 10 publishing agents in New York. He is the name amongst names. Pat Conroy has never spoken to a literary agent, never written a letter, a query letter to anyone in his life. He has no idea whatsoever what he's doing. He just has a business card with a number and an address. So he writes out a 3-paragraph summary of the book that he envisions in the hopes that if Julian answers or if someone answers, he'll have basically a script that he can work from. And Julian does answer the phone for whatever reason, talks to Pat, is not immediately impressed with him at all, but Pat manages to say something in the course of this quick call that catches Julian's attention. And Julian invites Pat to send the fully typed manuscript for the weekend read, as he called it. There's a problem, and that is that Pat Conroy does not know how to type. He has never, ever learned how to type. So he has only his handwritten manuscript and just a couple of days to turn this into a typed manuscript. So Pat's wife, Barbara, and his mother, Peg, recruited all of the women in the neighborhood to type up chapters of this book. They pass out chapters to each woman at the back door of the house, give them a deadline to turn it back in, and they think they've sort of solved the problem. But because Pat doesn't type, he doesn't really think this through. And when the chapters come back, they're all typed on different forms of typing paper. State Representative Harriet Kaiserling has typed her chapter on her personal letterhead, and nobody knows their page numbers. So every single chapter starts on page 1 and goes as far as it goes. There's no time to retype this. There's no time to do anything other than put a ribbon around this thing and mail it off to Julian Bach. And Pat is absolutely convinced he's blown his one and only chance to get a literary agent. He thinks there's no way in hell he's ever going to hear from this guy ever again. But he does hear from Julian. About a week later, Julian calls Pat and says, I want you to know that the manuscript has arrived here in the office. The girls have been passing it around. They think it's the cutest thing they've ever seen in their lives. So I will take some time and read it when I can. And he does read it. And Julian loves this book, and he's ultimately able to place it. He agrees to represent Pat. And here I want to read quickly a brief excerpt from the Pat Conroy cookbook, in which Pat describes the moment in which Julian Bach, his agent, calls him and tells him the good news about The Water is Wide. So let me read this. It's about a paragraph and a half. 2 months later, Julian Bach called me from New York. Pat, are you sitting down? I've got some great news for you. What is it? Houghton Mifflin, publisher of Thoreau, Emerson, Henry James, and Emily Dickinson, wants very much to publish The Water is Wide. But here's the really great news, Pat, he said, enjoying the long silence. $7,500. I frowned, shook my head, then said a line Julian Bach has never let me forget. But Julian, I can get it done a lot cheaper down here. There was what I can only call a stunned silence when I heard Julian clear his throat and say, Pat, you do realize it is they who pay you to publish and not the other way around. My God, people must be so naive in Beaufort, South Carolina. So that's Pat Conroy. It's 26, 27 years old, knowing nothing whatsoever about publishing, still thinking that he's going to have to pay a publisher, Houghton Mifflin, D. Houghton Mifflin, to publish his book, not understanding that it is they who will pay him an advance against royalties, because he is completely foreign to this world. So that book, The Water is Wide, was published in 1872 with a $7,500 advance. And this begins a relationship between Pat and his agent, Julian Bach, that will last another 28 years. Julian will represent Pat all the way up through the Prince of Tides. And Pat will stay with Houghton Mifflin. This is at a time when publishers were dedicated to helping a writer forge a career and really investing in a writer who maybe didn't hit it out the park with the first book or the second or even the third. But by Prince of Tides, Houghton Mifflin's pretty happy that they have Pat Conroy in their ranks. So this becomes a really wonderful launching pad for Pat. He does absolutely everything wrong, right? But somehow it works out for him. That's the wonderful thing about Pat Conroy. He was very lucky, and he always appreciated that. And that was part of the reason he was so dedicated to helping other writers, because he knew how difficult it was to start. He knew that his experiences were not the way it goes for so many writers. So what does all this mean? If you want to be published, should you look at publishers in the yellow pages or wait for a reporter to give you the name of agents? Are there even still yellow pages? Well, yes, there are, but that's probably not the best resource you can use. So here I'm going to tell you a little bit about how to find pathways to publication right now, how to find vetted good directories of good reputable publishers and agents and contests and literary magazines, so you don't end up wasting your very precious time going down dead ends, or worse yet, getting yourself into a situation where you're paying for things that you don't need to pay for, and no book ever materializes from it, which is unfortunately what happens to a lot of writers. A lot of what I'm going to share with you comes from Jane Friedman, and if this is not somebody you're familiar with, and you take only one thing away from this program tonight, go to Jane's website, get to know what she does, read the book she has in her hand, The Business of Being a Writer, which is a remarkable resource for anyone interested in any part of this business. More recently, she's also put out this book, Publishing 101, which is also exceptional. These are both available in very affordable, very cheap, frankly, paperback or ebook editions. Jane gets paid very well to tell large publishers and high-powered authors what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong. And because of that, she's able to make a lot of other resources freely or cheaply available to the rest of us. She is a good citizen of this literary community that we're in, and she does a remarkable service to all of us in putting out the kind of resources that she does. And perhaps the most important thing she does, which she just did a new edition of very recently, is this right here, her more or less annual guide to defining the major aspects of what she identifies as about 6 pathways to publication, which you can see divided into the columns there. If you can't see this particularly clearly on your screen, I'm going to put this PDF document into our chat in just a second. You'll have it in that form as well. And that's true of another document that'll have virtually all of the links I'm about to share with you also. But this is a really handy guide to getting a quick understanding of the major ways in which one can be published. And Jane divides these up on a very simple way, which takes us back to our Pat Conroy story. She thinks about who pays whom for what. In other words, how does the money change hands in a particular model of publishing? So, for example, in traditional publishing, both with big 5 publishers out of New York and then many of the other larger publishers, the author is not expected to pay for the publishing of the book. It is the author who gets the royalties. The money comes in that direction. I know a lot of New York Times bestselling writers, a lot. And I've yet to meet one who spends $0 whatsoever on their book. Authors are going to spend some amount of money on some aspect of publishing, no matter what, whether that's a book tour or a publicist or some sort of augmented aspect of the book or rights and permissions or color photography or something that's above and beyond the means of the publisher. And that's true even for the folks who are New York Times bestselling writers. It's certainly true for writers with smaller presses as well. So we've got this group of publishers at the top of our screen share right now where most of the money, potentially not all of the money, but most of the money is coming from the publisher to you, not the other way. In indie or self-publishing, the author is paying for some aspect and potentially all aspects of the publishing experience. And there's also things I see less and less now, social or online publishing, where people are putting things out entirely free just because they want to do that. They want an audience to read and get some benefit from the work, and they have no particular investment in having it exist in a tangible, saleable form. So how do you pick a path? Well, it really comes down to how you complete this sentence. I'll know I'm a successful writer when what? What does success look for you? This is a good writing prompt, incidentally, if you ever want to try it. And I'll give you one more as well that sort of helps you define your path. Think about why you write. Pat Conroy was often asked by burgeoning writers, what does it take to stay in this? What does it take to have a writing career, not just to put out one book, but to make a life of this? And he would say, if you got to do it, you got to do it. Meaning if it's in you, if it's the thing that is dearest to your heart, then you have the capacity to stick with it. But if there's something you love more than writing, you should probably go do that instead, because it's probably going to be easier than writing, which is not an easy life to stick with. So for Pat, it was always about the passion as much as it was anything else. So this is one of our Story River writers, and this is a face that may be familiar to a few of you on the call. This is Bren McLean, lives in Nashville now, originally from here in South Carolina. And she wrote a book called One Good Mama Bone, which went on to become the first University Press book ever to win the Willie Morris Award for Southern Fiction, a $10,000 prize. It was one of 2 Story River books that won that award, which is not a bad track record, as it turns out. But Bren was at a point just before she was able to fully commit herself to writing this book, when she was working in corporate communications, getting paid a lot of money to teach CEOs how to talk to regular people. That was basically her job, but not really enjoying that work at all. And she had always wanted to be a writer, and she really wasn't living that dream. So she gave herself a challenge, and this is one you can give yourself as well. This is a particularly good writing prompt, I find, as well. She decided one day to write her own obituary. What would be in that obituary if she died that particular day? So she wrote it out, and it said that she was a corporate communications executive, and she worked for these companies, and she had done work with these particular CEOs, and it sort of listed all her professional credentials. And she was excited by not one single word of that, because there was nothing in there at all about being a writer. So she wrote a different obituary that same night about what would happen if she had actually lived her dream and then died. What would that obituary say? And in that obituary, she was listed as the well-respected, well-read, much beloved, award-winning author of X number of novels that had won these prizes, and this one had been made into a movie. And right, I mean, she wrote sort of the dream life. And this became her vision. This became her strategic plan for who she really wanted to be. And she walked away from the corporate job. She walked away from it for a long time to write this novel, One Good Mama Bone, that was in her, that was clawing to get out, and transformed her whole life. This is a writing prompt that's put her on another direction. It put her on the path to be published. It led her to me and to Pat Conroy, and we got to publish One Good Mama Bone. And Bren became the model for what we hoped Story River would be. She was exactly the kind of writer who benefited from the existence of this imprint. So yes, this is Mr. Dickens. This is sort of the decision that Bren reached as well. And this is, of course, from late in the novel, The Christmas Carol, when Scrooge is encountering the ghost of Christmas yet to come, and asks if this is, the fate that's going to happen or the fate that just could happen. Can I make a different set of decisions and choose a different life? And that's exactly what Bren does when she decides she's going to be a writer, when she decides she's going to choose a pathway to publication. So I think I'm going to skip this because it's in the handout I'll send you, and we may be getting close to our time to switch over to Q&A here. So let me tell you quickly about how to find small presses, if that is indeed your interest. And that's the world that I occupied for so long. So I'm a great advocate for this. Jane Friedman's website has a whole section about how to find, identify, and evaluate small presses. And I certainly encourage you to go to that. I'll put a document in the chat in just a second that has all these links in it. Poets and Writers, which I imagine many of you are familiar with. If you're not subscribing to the magazine, I hope you're at least going to the website from time to time, because it's a really wonderful vetted searchable directory, not only of small presses, but of several other things as well, literary contests, magazines, and indeed literary agents as well. So here's a quick screenshot of Poets and Writers, not a recent one though, but you'll see a tab right there to the left that says Publish Your Writing. If you go to the website and click on that, this is where you get all these wonderful directories, and they are searchable through multiple filters. So you can really drill down to a particular genre if you're looking for writing contests or for small press publishers or literary magazines. You can see, you can sort by deadline, so you know what you can submit for immediately versus what's a little further down the path. The literary agent database is really good too, because it is not open to anybody who claims to be a literary agent. The editors of Poets and Writers actually put some time in to vet this to make sure these are good, reputable people. And this is searchable in multiple ways as well. And the listing you'll find will take you directly to the information on that agent's website about how to contact them and how to submit. So here are a couple of other resources for finding traditional publishers and agents too. And once again, Jane has done the homework for the whole class, because there are sections of her page that are dedicated to these two things as well that are really handy. And then the major directories, which some of you may well be familiar with already, Writers Marketplace and Literary Marketplace, both exist in print form. And at this point, there's very little reason to buy either in print form, because they're being updated all the time. They're sort of immediately out of date by the time they're published. So the online directories that they make available are much, much handier. And you can pay for an annual subscription, but there's almost no reason to do that. You can take a good weekend and sign up for a daily or a week subscription and do a deep dive and do all the research that you need to find the kind of listings that you're looking for, save those, cancel your subscription, go on about your business, do it again later when you need to look things up a second time. Here are what I would think of as the best resources for finding a good agent as well, and not going down a rabbit hole of finding a bunch of random people who claim to be agents but really aren't. Publishers Marketplace is great. You can sign up for a month for $25 and search all the listings that you want, and then cancel your subscription and start querying those agents that you found. Agent Query, Query Tracker, Manuscript Wish List, which is very nice as well, and literaryagencies.com, which is a curated list of 1,000 literary agents, which seems like a big number, except in the scope of how many there are. It's a relatively small number, actually. And this is put together by a former agent and coach who spends a lot of time thinking about who should be and shouldn't be on the list. And then there's a section of Writer's Digest, which is very good about running profile pieces of agents who are actively seeking submissions, who are actively looking for authors. And that's a nice thing to be able to mention when you contact someone, that you saw their profile in Writer's Digest. So for many folks, and increasingly, this is a very appealing path to not do any of the aforementioned things and instead go straight to indie publishing or self-publishing or some manner of hybrid publishing where you and the publisher are going to split the costs. You will each pay for some subset of this experience. And there are three, although I would say increasingly two sort of key avenues, Ingram Spark and the Amazon edition, which is now Kindle Direct Publishing. Both websites for those are right there on your site. iUniverse, of course, used to be a big part of this, and that seems to be less and less true. Fewer and fewer people are going to iUniverse because they're getting more of what they need from Ingram Spark or from KDP. Jane Friedman, once again, as is true in all of our subtopics here, also has a section of her website about self-publishing your book, what to look out for, what to definitely not ever do, and what to always do. And that's a very handy guide as well. And then there's a resource that I check in very often with, just because I find it quite entertaining. It's sort of the Yelp reviews of independent publishers. It's the Independent Publisher magazine site, in which authors, very much like yourselves, who've had an experience with an indie publisher, get to rate them. And generally people only rate if they've had a bad experience. That's the motivation that sends them to the site. So you can read a lot of cautionary tales about publishers you would like to avoid if you go to this site, which I find very handy as well. So, here's a good lesson. I used to put a quote from Pat Conroy up here, but I think this is probably a better one from Thomas Mann. A writer is somebody for whom writing is more difficult than it is for other people. And that I find to be very much true. Those of us who invest emotionally in this care very deeply about what we are doing. We care about the outcome. We care about the impact it's going to have on our readers. And because of that emotional investment, writing can seem like a very difficult business. But what Mr. Conroy always said about it, which I like very much, is this. He said, writing is not an easy way to make a living, but it's a wonderful way to make a life. And I think that is a very true statement. The writer's life is a wonderful one to be in. And I congratulate all of you who are making that choice to be writers and whatever that might mean to you. So let me stop my screen share here so I can see all of you again. And at this point, let's do two things simultaneously in the interest of time. Let's open it up to Q&A. I'll be very happy to answer any questions you have. And while we're doing that, I'm going to multitask and put those documents in the chat for you to pick up as well.
Well, I was going to comment on Ingram Spark and Kindle KDP, as they call it.
Yeah,
you can
please.
actually publish on both platforms. I usually put it up first on KDP, and then you go over to Ingram Spark where you have an account. And often if you do NaNoWriMo in November, you often get a free code that you can use till March. I think it's good till March. But then you write a letter to them saying, I would like to share my metadata. And they kind of talk between each other. This way I'm able to have books into bookstores because Ingram Spark is how you want it. But
Yes.
frankly, most of my sales are on KDP, but every now and then I will sell books, but that's the reason why I do it. And it's sharing what you have already set up over at KDP, and then it goes live. Like I just uploaded my using, I have a new interior with maps. So I'm going to go to Ingram Spark probably tomorrow and upload the new interior. I'm understanding that the NaNoWriMo code still works to March. So I'm going to try to see if I can do it for free. They usually charge $40, I think. If you belong to I think it's the Independent Alliance of Independent Authors, that's another great group to belong to. It costs about $99, but it is worth it. And you have a lot of access to stuff that way, that you get a code and you can upload your book for free. So I've been doing indie now since 2010, and I'm very happy. I mean, I'm excited to be in the Pulpwood Queen anthology. That was a lot of fun to do. And
Wow.
some of us are being published, and we do a wonderful thing with our library, the Whatcom Read. So many of us are in Whatcom Writes following this reconciliation theme that was this year. So there's lots of ways to do it. I'm happy. I agree with you about the writing life. I don't make a lot of money, but I'm having a grand life. So
That's great to hear, Janet. Yeah, and to your point, there are definitely advantages to being in both Ingram Spark, which gives you access to bookstores and to libraries too. Let's not overlook that part. And also being in KDP, which gives you Amazon, which of course the largest bookseller in the world. There is sort of another one I didn't put on the list because it's a bit more specialized, but most libraries buy their books through a company called Baker and Taylor, which is the largest distributor into libraries, and they can get books from Ingram Spark, right? That's a legitimate pathway into libraries. But a few years ago, Baker and Taylor realized, when looking at Ingram and Amazon, that it just made sense for them to buy their own print-on-demand publisher. So they bought Bookmasters, which is now a conduit in which you can do the same thing doing with the other two. You can upload your files through Bookmaster, and that just makes a more direct conduit into libraries through Baker and Taylor.
well, that's good to know.
I have a question, Jonathan.
Yes.
Did you stay in touch with the SIU people after you left by any chance?
For a while, but I'm not
Yeah.
still in touch with them. There's been a pretty significant changeover in the staff there, so I don't think I know much about the current folks.
Okay, I was just wondering if you ever had any contact with John Tribble.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, I did know John, and I still know
Okay.
Allison very well. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I had MFA classes. I didn't get an MFA. I was just in the class, but at Indiana.
Mhm.
So yeah, I knew John, and I was just curious if you'd ever bumped into them. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
I didn't mention in my bio, but I went to grad school at SIU, so I knew John and Allison as faculty members.
Oh.
The press. Yes.
Oh, nice, nice. Okay.
Mhm.
He's a good guy. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh.
I think I saw a question pop up in the chat, so give me a second to go look at that. What do you think? This is a question from the chat. Sorry. What do you think of the annual guide to literary agents? I've been using it, but a bit overwhelming. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That is quite the rabbit hole to go down. I think the smaller, more vetted guide to agents are actually much more useful. The Poets and Writers Guide or literaryagents.com, the vetted list I mentioned, which is put together by a former agent. Those are much more focused. I find them much easier to search, and because they're online resources, they'll take you directly to the agent's website, and you can read that agent's bio and submission guidelines and find out very quickly if they are or aren't open to submissions. So I find those directories to be much less overwhelming. Jeff Herman's guide is also helpful. Not familiar with that. Nancy, could you say a little bit more about what that is?
Hi, Jonathan. Sorry, I don't have a voice. I'm joining you here in South Carolina. Jeff Herman has been publishing a guide to agents and editors for years, and New World Library publishes it now.
Okay.
So he's down to earth and helpful, gives lots of insider information, and it's a fun read as well.
That's terrific. I'll have a look at that. Thank you for that.
I'm still an agent here in South Carolina.
Okay.
I'm working as an indie agent. I've worked under the radar for years because I've been taking care of ill family members, but have a couple published books myself, and I'm still editing and wearing the agent hat also.
That's wonderful, Nancy. I remember that we had been in touch several times. Bill Thompson, our mutual friend. Yes. Good to see you.
I have a couple authors for the center to talk to you about soon who have some talents.
Please be in touch. I would love that.
Great. Good to see you.
You too.
Thanks, everyone.
Actually, I am familiar with Jeff Herman because I think he's come to Seattle for this, the PNWA. That's our big conference, Pacific Northwest Writers. And, you know, it's always good to ask your library for some of these big tomes. They will buy it for you. And I think I have seen Herman's guide there. I think at one time I bought it, you know, when I was at the conference. So, and Beaufort is on my bucket list. I hope when we could travel, I really do want to go to that part of the world.
Please come. Our hope is that the Pulpwood Queens Book Club convention moves to Beaufort at least 1 year, comes
Yeah,
from
that'd be
Jefferson,
awesome.
Texas to our side of the country. It would be a wonderful thing for us to host.
Mhm.
He's done it for 28 years.
Yeah, that's it. That's the one.
So,
We have a lot of shy people here, but we've got some wonderful writers in our group. Speak up.
there's a question in the chat about what the center does to help writers, which I'll speak to quickly because I could give a long answer that would take another hour, and I don't think we want that one. So we offer a number of workshops. You know, we just hosted one tonight, which was sort of audiobooks 101 for writers who have always been interested about how to create an audiobook but haven't undertaken that step. We did one 2 nights ago about turning memories into stories, so sort of a memoir writing workshop. So we're always offering these workshops, generally very low priced and very often free if we have a sponsor for them as well. And those are all done virtually right now. So we have a student population that's all over the country and occasionally outside of the country taking those workshops. We also host a lot of free author events with very well-known writers. 2 weeks from now, we're hosting Sarah Shepard, author of the young adult series Pretty Little Liars, and about 40 other books, #1 New York Times bestselling young adult author. A couple weeks after that, we have Bruce Feiler, a 5-time New York Times bestselling writer, and Bakari Sellers, another New York Times bestseller for memoir. So we have a lot of folks at that level who give very freely of their time in these events with no particular expectations of book sales right now, just simply to talk to readers and writers. Book clubs, writers groups are all part of what we do as well. So it's Pat Conroy Literary Center.org. You can sign up for our email newsletter, and we will send you all that good information about how to sign up for those events. You can also find us on Facebook or Instagram, where we're always pumping out new events. Very easy to find out and sign up for what we're doing. And anything that we do for free, we typically live stream on our Facebook page and also post to our YouTube channel, where there are at this point about 120 videos already up from previous events. So a lot of material freely available from the center right now. Great. I see a virtual hand up from Susan. Hi, Susan.
Hi, Jonathan. My question is, I have a book out, a memoir that's been out since April, and I'm toying with putting it out as an ebook. And I'm just trying to decide, cost benefit ratio. I mean, it's like, will I ever make any money back in publishing it by ebook?
Mm-hmm. Have you been doing fairly well with your print edition?
Well, it's hard to say because I released my book during COVID. So all of my events were canceled. So I'm doing everything virtual. And this is my first book. So I can't even tell you, am I doing fabulously? I feel like I'm doing well, but I have no clue, to be honest with you. And I don't have a publicist, so I'm doing all my own marketing.
So, and there's very little cost to turning an existing book into an ebook. So the risk is relatively minimal. So, from that regard, there's no real reason not to do it. It adds to the discoverability of the print book as well, simply by virtue of having the other volume available. I'm reluctant to say too much in favor of ebooks when I know we're being hosted tonight by an independent bookseller. So But we also have a number of writers on the call who may be able to speak to their own ebook experiences as well. Mine, I will say, have been mostly positive, but the print editions of the books I'm in have vastly outsold the ebook editions.
Okay, well, that's helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
I have a quick question about university presses.
Yes.
I have applied to only one university press. I live here, of course, in Washington State. I applied to the University of Washington, a university press, and was turned down. I have not tried any others, and I had the supposition that you needed to be somehow geographically located or otherwise academically related to a university press before applying. What do you think about that?
Yeah, those are the assumptions that most people make, and both are very often entirely wrong. And that's, that's no one's particular fault other than university presses for perhaps not doing a good job collectively of really marketing the resource that they are. So there's an association of university presses, which is simply called that, the Association of University Presses. They have a website that you can go to that has a directory of all university presses, about 150. And that will tell you who publishes what and whether or not they're open to submissions. Very rarely, almost never, in fact, do you need an agent to approach a university press. Doesn't mean you can't have one, and sometimes doesn't mean you shouldn't have one, but very rarely is it a requirement. Most university presses, if they publish trade or general interest books, some percentage of those are regional, which means they are looking for subject matter that's related to them geographically. And that's true of all Southern university presses with the exception of Duke. Duke is the only Southern university press that does not have a regional list. But they'll probably also have some other specialization which may or may not relate to their physical location whatsoever. And then the other half of what they do will be esoteric and academic books that are generally destined for university libraries where no one will ever read them cover to cover, if at all, but it's valuable to scholarship that they exist in that way. But those authors, even the academic authors, really are not expected to have an affiliation with that university. They're expected to be good at what they do, at whatever the academic subject is, but that doesn't mean they have to be on faculty at that particular university. So if I may ask, Sandy, what kind of book were you pitching? What was the genre? What was the subject?
Narrative nonfiction, which I discovered is kind of an odd duck. This is my first attempt. I would have to say I was more than 500 pages into the manuscript before I even knew that that was the category that it was in.
Yes.
So there are times when I emphasize to people its fictional aspect, and there are times when I say this is basically nonfiction. My background actually is in medicine. The other schools that I've been associated with are Stanford undergraduate, UCSF for residency, back in Missouri, my home state, for med school. And then I taught for 16 years UC Davis. So I suppose I could look at some other university presses, and just because of that affiliation, they might be willing to look at something like this. But I don't know. My book has nothing to do with medicine, which is what I taught all my life.
I was going to ask if there was a medical or medical humanities aspect to it.
There's one character that's going through a infectious disease fellowship, but other than that, no.
Okay. If you, and this is certainly not the only avenue for narrative nonfiction, but if you do choose to go to the Association of University Presses website and look at that directory, you'll find that as one of the categories. There are a handful of university presses who are very invested in that. University of South Carolina Press used to be one of them. I don't think that's the case with the new director, but there was a time when that was a part of our list as well.
Thanks.
So,
appreciate the information.
Sure, I appreciate the question.
Hi, Jonathan. I have a question as a young writer and just coming into the field. At this point, I'm working mainly in just getting essays published in literary magazines, and have had a handful of successes with that, and it seems to be moving. And I think my question from here is I'm feeling like I'm at that point of, is that what you're supposed to be doing? Should I be moving into something else? What happens and what comes next? And I'll say I write creative nonfiction, so I'm not in the fiction world as much there.
Well, congratulations on being published and having a good track record out of the gate. Are you doing things right? Yeah, I would say definitely so. What is your expectation with these essays that you're publishing, that they could become the basis of a book, or they sort of live their own lives and you work your way toward something else? What do you hope would be the next step in the process for you?
Yeah, the ones published so far are along a theme that I would love to see published in a collection at some point. But I've
Yeah.
had some nervousness that if they have a home elsewhere, will they be picked up by a publisher?
Yeah, oh no, I hear you. That's actually a very common anxiety among writers. How much work should I put out to create an audience versus how much should I be, holding back for a book length project? And as a publisher of essay collections, very often we would very happily accept works where about 50% of the chapters of the essays had a publication in some form prior to the book. And that was a very safe number. That was actually a very appealing number because it meant that the author had some credibility and had established an audience. Here at the Conroy Center, we have the other half of my team, our communications and events coordinator, has been working on a memoir for about 4 years and just recently decided to start carving off chapters and submitting them for publication in literary magazines, kind of having the same concern you're describing. If I put this out there, is that going to spoil my chances of publishing the book? One of those chapters was selected to be a featured piece in one of the literary magazines out of Florida. And Brooke got an inquiry from an agent because of that, an agent who does what good agents should do, which is read literary magazines in their genres, and wrote to Brooke immediately. I mean, within a week of that issue coming out, just absolutely in love with that piece and asking if there was a manuscript that she was working on. I mean, that's sort of the ideal situation, that someone comes to you because they've read something that you've put out there in a literary journal. Doesn't happen as often, as we wish it would, but I was delighted when it happened for Brooke, and it may very well be something that happens to you if you keep putting work out there too. So, think of it in that regard too. It's sort of putting bait in the water every time you publish something.
Thank you so much. That's so helpful.
Oh, absolutely. That was a great question. Any other great questions out there, gang?
I guess I'll go.
Yes.
What's the next step for the center? Because you bought your new place. I've seen a picture of it. So what's happening now that you have a real home?
Well, now we have to pay for it, Janet. There's expectation on the part of the bank that we're pay off our mortgage. So that's what we will be doing. No, the center is, roughly 5 years old. We've been in borrowed spaces, rented spaces in 2 other buildings, and we've just purchased our first permanent home. Sorry, I'm getting an alert there, but I think we're still on, which is wonderful. So we own property now, which is great. So we're in the process of moving in. And the new center will be equal parts museum and classroom space. And for the time being, that will be primarily a virtual classroom, a studio of sorts from which we broadcast our educational programs to make them available everywhere. But in time, when it's safe to resume in-person classes, it'll be a hybrid teaching space. So, I mean, that's sort of what's going on with the physical center, but really the center is what we do. It's the engagement that we have, doing a lot of programs with schools right now and a lot of programs with lifelong learners, with retirees. Those are sort of the key categories of students that we have. And we're sort of working our way toward the middle to people who are in between those 2 categories. But it's been just an absolutely remarkable experience to see this thing take shape and to see the amount of good that it can do in the world in such a small amount of time. From tiny little Beaufort, South Carolina, too.
Wonderful.
Jonathan, there's another chat question there.
Oh, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Pop that up. Yes, so this is the question. Oh, this is a nice one too. Is there a graceful or diplomatic way to fire an agent that won't hurt your chances of getting another? Actually, agents and authors part company all the time. This is part of the business. So, you're not going to be blacklisted for firing your agent. I know a lot of very successful authors who've had to part company with agents along the way and had those kinds of anxieties about it, particularly if it's an agent who was there with them in the beginning, who was part of that story, somebody who have the sort of sentimental, emotional investment in as well as a financial one. But these are really key relationships. The relationship between author and agent is essential for so many writing careers. It has to be of mutual benefit and of mutual respect. And if it isn't, then it's time to walk away from that, which writers do all the time, for better or worse.
Very reassuring. Thank you very much.
May I add to that, Jonathan? As
Please.
an agent.
Yes.
It's so important when you join forces with an agent to have an agency agreement in which,
yeah, I had that. Yeah.
which there's a termination clause which clearly outlines that when either party wants to finish the relationship, it's spelled out, and that makes it so much easier.
Yeah. Nancy, I did that and it worked out, but the problem is I feel these personal overtones.
Yeah.
Because I think, as Jonathan was very correct, this was an agent that grabbed me right out of the gate. It was very encouraging, but it just hasn't worked out. I mean, her personality and I are like oil and water, and this is a marriage, and I think I'm in it for the long haul, and you want to have a good relationship, and I'm a funny person and she's not, and things like that. So it's come to nothing, and I think it's time to, what they say in the South, cut your bait or something, let the fish go.
Yes.
But it made me nervous because she hinted at the fact that she's up there enough that maybe I won't get another agent of her caliber. And then I thought to myself, yeah, you're right, I'll get an agent who's better. I didn't say that though.
Good for you, Patricia.
I'm very nervous about it, yeah, but I need to do it, yeah.
It sounds like you do. Yeah, if that's the tone of the conversation now, then that seems like.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Jonathan. Giving me some strength here. Okay.
Now, somewhere out there is the advocate you need, and you will find that person, and that will be a much better relationship for you to have in the long run.
This has been great, guys. What a wonderful program. Oh my.
Excellent.
Jonathan, I get a little bit, can I, oh, sorry.
Oh, yes, please.
I'm really new to the writing world and I'm taking a bunch of classes right now, but I get a little bit confused. So for many people, this is just going to be redundant, but I read that there's some publishing companies that have their editors, but then you have to send your book to an editor first. And I just get a little bit confused as to what, just what you're supposed to do first, second, third. Once I've had my book done and I was going to send it to it's a type of editing, but it's not just a developmental editor.
Sure.
And then what would I do after that? And I'm working on the book proposal. I'm in the middle of that.
Okay. So this is a topic we've done workshops on at the Conroy Center. What kind of editor does what kind of editing? And if that's a speaker that y'all would be interested in having for this group, I can certainly recommend some editors who speak about that very well. And at the tail end of the document I put into the chat, the PDF with all the links on it, there's a section of additional resources that I didn't cover in the slideshow, but it includes a short list of resources on how to find a developmental editor or a copy editor, good reputable people who are in that business, or book designers or freelance, all the sorts of publishing professionals that an author may need to hire themselves. So, to your question about what, let's say an agent, if your path is through an agent to a traditional publisher, what kind of editing would they expect to be done to your manuscript before they see it? Increasingly, I hear from agents, from publishers, and from authors that they're sending their work to a freelance editor, an external editor, for responses, for developmental editing, sometimes for copy editing, before they send it to an agent. Therefore, before the agent sends it on to the publisher, who will, of course, have their own editors to do work to it as well. So the more polished, the more final, the more publishable a manuscript looks, the more likely it is going to make it through that process. So very often it is to your benefit to work with a freelance editor before you take a step towards submission. A very, very good freelance editor, which is the kind you should seek out, will actually have done this often enough to have ideas for you as the author as to where you should send that manuscript in terms of agents or publishers, based on where other projects that they've worked on have been published. That's sort of a value added to working with a good freelance editor. And I've had a lot of writer friends who are sort of in the position you are, starting out, not really having an agent or any idea how to get one, and just wanting to have the best possible version of their novel or their memoir, whatever it is, before they take that process. And they found their way into the hands of a good editor who can actually help them, who can give them some advice on where these books can be submitted. So it becomes worthwhile. And a freelance editor, a good one, is an expensive prospect. So, so much the better that you get more than just an edited manuscript out of it, that you get some advice about placement as well. So on that document, there is a link for Readsy and a couple of other places that have do really nice work of vetting who their editors are, or their freelance publicists, or whomever they work with. So you're not going to be spending a bunch of money on somebody who's not worthwhile. But if that's the kind of topic you want to take up for a longer conversation, I can recommend some folks to you who speak very well about that very subject.
I have a question for Nancy. So I'm indie published, but I wouldn't mind having a foreign rights agent. So I went to Historical Novel Society in Oxford, England several years ago. I had an agent who was very interested, because she says what I was writing was very popular. I write about Norway in World War II. But she wanted to take everything above 1,000 words, everything. And I kind of like to keep my US rights, but I wouldn't mind selling my rights to places. So I didn't follow through on it. I was kind of taken aback by that. And I want to know how you go about with the foreign rights. Some of us would probably like to see our books maybe in print elsewhere in a different language and stuff like that. So how do you go about that?
It's kind of a long answer. I'd be happy. Let's see.
You could email me.
Traditionally published works, some agents work directly with foreign agents. Others, I work through Curtis Brown. Sometimes Jonathan Lyons at Curtis Brown has handled foreign right that I had. As an indie author, you're asking a question I'm not sure of. It would depend. Foreign rights would be something that would be looked after if you have good sales. And
of course,
you can go onto literary agent sites and look at they often list their foreign agents, and you could just be gung-ho and find a foreign agent in the country that you are interested in, and contact them and just be straightforward. Say, I'm an indie author with this many sales. I think my book has potential in your country. Would you be willing to pitch it to publishers? and then you would get a response. There may be other ways for indie authors, but I'm not familiar with them. If I find that out, you can leave your email and I would send you that information.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. I also, The Essential Guide to Getting Your Book Published is a great book also for anyone who wants to enter the publishing business. Jane Friedman is she's just the best go-to. And I think she recommends this book on her site as well. It gives you an overview of how the whole industry works. So thanks for that question.
Yeah, that is a great book as well. I've got one on the shelf across from me, right in the room here, Nancy. Yeah, that's one I refer to quite a bit. Yeah, Janet, to your question, just as a former publisher at USC Press, we hired a sub-rights agency to represent all of the USC Press books for which we had foreign rights. I mean, very often an author would keep them and then discover they could do nothing with them, that they didn't have the resources. But there are folks who specialize in that. They are out there. I'm not exactly sure how you find them. I know how we found ours. It was someone that we knew, but perhaps between a little research that Nancy and I can do, we can maybe direct you to some directories of agents in the US who specialize in that, who specialize in being conduits to foreign rights sales or other sub-rights for that matter.
Thanks.
Sorry, a couple things happen in the chat there. Yes, Claire, what did you post a link to, if I may ask?
That is to the book that she just told us about. And next, the Essential Guide to Getting Your Book Published.
Yes.
And then the next link that I am putting in the chat is to, I'm going to get to it very quickly here, Our Prince of Scribes, which we can also get very quickly at Village Books.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, that book was quite the endeavor. A lot of good writerly advice in that, although that's more accidental than intentional. If you work with 67 writers, many of whom got to be the kind of writers that they are because of Pat Conroy, they do end up sharing some of that advice in the course of telling their stories about Mr. Conroy. So it's a very handy resource in that way too. Thank you for posting that, Claire. Thank you for having access to the book, for making it available. I appreciate that. And I appreciate our time tonight, guys. Any other questions in closing? Again, thank you,
Jonathan.
so much.
I want to thank you so much for coming. Despite the fact that a lot of people in this group do have experience as writers, if not, vastly published ones, what you have said tonight has been invaluable to all of us, don't really grateful that, holy cow, it's 11:30 there. I hope you don't have to get up early. But thank you so much. You want to unmute and give them a round of applause, folks? Thank
you, Jonathan.
We're very grateful. And if you didn't see his PDFs in the chat, you want to scroll through that really quickly and get those. And I think that would more or less take care of it. Well, oh yeah, okay. Jennifer did ask you if it was going to be problematic for the timing, so I appreciate your flexibility. So, well, this was beautiful. Thanks for your generosity of your time and your help with everything you told everybody about. It's just superb. Okay, last chance, folks. Last question. And gone. Oh, here we go.
Oh, I have a wonderful Valentine's Day book that I edited, The Illuminated Hafez, with Coleman Marks and Robert Bly. Omid Safi wrote the foreword, and it's available through Sounds True. And it would be wonderful for your beloveds. I thank you for letting me pitch at the very end.
Sure. Okay. Were those waves or questions that I saw the hands? Okay, there it is.
All right.
Good night, sleep tight.
Thank you.
Good night,
Thank you very
everyone. Thank
much.
you so
Good night.
much.
Thanks,
Okay,
everybody.
I'm
Okay.
hitting the red button.
You do that.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.